As we enter the second part of the novel, major changes to the status quo begin. Riordan's men just can't continue to hold the wild men back any longer when Serene is bringing food. They just keep coming. And every injury is permanent, creating a war of attrition here. Riordan, still in his guise as spirit, warns Serene of a likely attack, and sure enough, it arrives. The guards are able to repel it, but when one of the wild men are cut in two, he goes into the hoe-weed, the madness from the endless pain, and gibbers about just wanting a little food. Riordan is forced to admit that they were not handing food out the way Serene wanted, though they had been leaving food for the wild men to scavenge. Upon seeing the food collected for the collection of the hoe-weed, Serene assumes that Riordan is hoarding food and is some kind of evil tyrant. They withdraw back through the gates, only for them to reopen as Iadon has decided this action justifies exterminating the Elantrians. He's been looking for an excuse to do this for a long time, and Serene has just given it to him. Well, Serene is outraged at the idea that he would not only do this, but use her to justify this mass slaughter. So she proceeds to put the man in his place. She rails at him and threatens to reveal that he is in debt to her, which would undermine his position completely. With no choice, a cowed Iadon issues a proclamation reversing his prior order and sparing the Elantrians. Riordan, however, has lost someone in that attack, his chief military officer. The guy suffered such injuries that the hoe-weed has claimed him. And the degree of his injuries are such that Riordan reaches a hard decision. He has the man taken to the pool so that he can be freed from his suffering forever. Remember, the pool where you just kind of disappear, and that, well, ends you and therefore ends your suffering. It's an exception doing this right now. Riordan's keeping the pool a secret. He fears that if people knew of it, Elantris would be depopulated in a matter of months. Better a soothing end than pain that drives one into madness. But he feels he's on the right track to help these people and doesn't want to begin the mass euthanasia that would surely follow. It's also the reason that he keeps the library a secret. He doesn't want to risk the last hope being lost due to well-meaning fools or even somebody eating the books. He makes progress on understanding what's happening to them, such as the slime. The Elantrians used to glow, just a little, and the city itself did as well. A fungus grew on everything then, translucent and harmless, and actually enhancing the appearance, so nothing was ever done about it. But when the Riot happened and the power of Elantris was lost, then the fungus died and rotted into the slime. This isn't useful information, as Galadon notes, but it is part of an overall tapestry. Everything they learn could be a step closer to solving the problem. One oddity Riordan can't help but notice is Hrathen being taken by the Sheod. It's a puzzler for him because the Sheod seems to have some kind of a genetic aspect to it. Thus, not all races can be taken. There's always the idea of having a bit of ancestry mix to have it happen. Duladin aren't usually taken, but there's enough overlap so that those like Galadon show up. But Hrathen's huge frame says that doesn't apply to him, so how he could have gotten chosen is a mystery. Hrathen doesn't arrive the way others do. While he does undergo all the usual ritual preparations, upon his entrance to Elantris, he begins loudly praying for Jadith to save him. I don't know about drawing Jadith's attention, but it sure draws that of the wild men, who plan to overwhelm him and take his stuff, as is the usual Elantris welcome. Instead, he breaks the neck of one and beats the others until they are driven off, then goes back to his prayers. Outside, Serene has been plotting to figure out what is going on in the palace. On the same night every week, there's this strange sound within the walls. To figure it out, she arranges for a massive party to be held by one of her aristocratic allies in anticipation of the lunar eclipse. It's going to be a huge celebration. Everyone's going to be there, so of course no one can afford to not be there. King Iadon naturally also has to be in attendance then, but he's clearly anxious about something. As predicted, he leaves early for whatever it is that he does, and Serene and her Sion follow him, down into the sewers in fact. And down there, they discover something truly horrifying. Iadon holding a bloody knife over an eviscerated young woman, all while surrounded by black-cloaked figures. It could have ended even worse, but then Eondel arrives and he easily dispatches the aggressors, and Iadon is arrested for this horrible crime. Seems that he was performing the Jesker mysteries and was using this evil power to try to kill Serene. Well, now the tables have truly turned, and the king hangs himself rather than face any further public humiliation, which of course creates a power vacuum that is just waiting to be filled. On one side is Telri, who has his own army now after having bribed the city guards. On the other is Serene and Royal, who will unite their two fortunes together through marriage to thus have enough wealth to exceed Telri's and place Royal on the throne. This Game of Thrones is interrupted by a shocking development. Hrathen's prayers to Jaddeth have been answered. He's free of the curse of the Sheod, and is the first Elantrian to ever be released from the city on his own recognizance, for he is not one of the undead anymore. And that's because he never was. It was all a deception. That loopy concoction maker had carefully crafted something that would mimic the effects of the Sheod, but only for a limited time. This meant Hrathen was still completely human, putting himself in extreme danger of death, as he was left with virtually no food and water for 5 days. But this did give him time to reflect on the nature of his faith. He wasn't filled with zeal like the others because he wasn't moved to serve Jaddeth. He did so because he found the arguments logically convincing. The faith was his because to him it made sense. This plan likewise was the will of Jaddeth, he says. Even though every step of it was the result of his own resourcefulness and cunning, Jaddeth uses the mundane to bring about his ends, and helps those who actively work towards his glory to achieve their aims. When his scheme is paid off, a guard just happens to spot him. Seemingly coincidental that he could open the gates right when Hrathen needed it to be, or else he might have succumbed to dehydration and fasting. This, he tells himself, if further proof be demanded, shows that Jaddeth had willed this course of action, for this could be no coincidence. Hrathen's faith is again shown to reside in his head and not in his heart. Like Fox Mulder's poster announces, I want to believe. So Hrathen's scheme is paid off. Everyone had heard of his pleas to his god, and he has been spared. Seemingly a miracle. Even Delof, upon seeing Hrathen return, falls to his knees before him in penitence for doubting the strength of Hrathen's faith. He still is not going to be obedient to his Giorn, but he's at least, more open to seeing Hrathen as having deserved his position. Hrathen, for his part, does not let Delof or any of the others in on the secret. After what he's been through, he dare not allow loose lips to undermine what it's achieved. People are again gathering to hear of Jaddeth, the clear miracle they've witnessed giving weight to his words. But while bringing the heathens to the faith is good, the issue is still to change the hearts of the rulers, and that means that Hrathen must continue the plan to put Telri on the throne, though it is made easier by Iadon's suicide, creating a vacancy. But he knows Serene is too wily an opponent to allow to potentially interfere. So he arranges for his last vial of the concoction. The other two were broken when some of the priests tried looting his things while he was in Elantris, but they couldn't get the steel box actually open. He wants to use that to poison her the same way that he had been poisoned and have her shut up in Elantris where she can't interfere. While waiting for the poison to take effect, the funeral happens, attended by the Patriarch, the Kilrathi version of the Pope essentially, who says that Iadon left a scroll with him to be presented either at his death or after 15 years of his rule, whichever came first. Seems that his rickety position as determined by a wealth system was Darwinian by design. The scroll decrees that the system is abolished. All titles currently held will remain as they are. Holding on to their positions for this long is proof enough that they have earned their places. This makes the marriage plan even more legitimate, as it both provides them with the most wealth and the strongest existing claim on the throne via heredity. The plan is foiled when, at the wedding, is when the poison finally has its effect, and Serene is seemingly taken by the Sheod. She arrives with all the rage at the situation that you might expect, but after she throws venom at Riordan, still thinking him a tyrant, she goes with him to see the village that they've made within. As she sees what they've done, she feels like a bit of a jackass. She treated the demands of Spirit as the game, to outwin him by satisfying his demands, but in ways that only technically met the requirements. Now she sees the results of her machinations was to make things more difficult for the downtrodden. Her actions had not been the charity she had pretended they were. It was one more element in her games. But still the Elantrians had made the most of what she gave them, wearing the hideous cloth in a way to bring color to the otherwise dead city, and in other ways. When you have next to nothing, you make good use of what little you do have. Riordan explains some of the things they figured out, including the door. An attack actually comes on him while he's with her, and she has some insight from her understanding of various religions. But a shocking moment happens when her Scion, Ash, arrives, still fully cognizant, not broken like the others are. There seems to be no explanation, but it's used to communicate with her father, who is barely persuaded not to march to Elantris, treaty be damned, with an army in order to retrieve his daughter. Riordan keeps his true identity a secret from her still going as Spirit. He's shocked at the events that have occurred in his absence, including his father's horrifying behavior and suicide. There's also many things about Serene that betray the fact that this isn't actually the Sheod on her, like not being able to draw on aeons. But all of these, they do have a precedent in one way or another, and even the presence of Ash is just assumed by Riordan to simply not be her Scion. But it's through Ash that they learn that Hrathen's plans are complete. Telri has now been made king. And things are far, far worse than you think.